the challenge in business sometimes is people don't actually know what their skill set is. When you get into business with someone, you don't know whether you have complementary or overlapping skills.
So when you work with someone, and especially with both of us being very like disagreeable people and like very willing to dig our heels, and a lot of it was us just having to grow up and realize, hey, we're fucking arguing a lot when really like we both have a shared outcome together. We both want to win. We both want to build something we're proud of. And actually, we both like each other.
Yeah, we're golden, baby girl, we're golden. They're about to see us shine, 'cause we're golden. They can't ever break us down, 'cause we're golden. They're about to see us glow, 'cause we're golden.
Hey guys, if you're enjoying the podcast, could you please go and leave us a 5-star review? Our mission with this podcast is to provide education and lessons from business leaders and founders for absolutely no cost. And every review we get and every bit of support that you throw behind us allows us to secure bigger names, bigger guests, and have amazing conversations. I really hope you enjoyed the episode. Thank you very much. Lewis and Raoul, welcome to the podcast.
What's up, man? Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
I think I put it in the brief that I sent across, but I think the thing that I'm most excited about on the conversation today is that a lot of the conversations I do have are in retrospect. Mm-hmm. So, they're either after an exit or they are, someone who is, had the success. They might be 7 or 8 years into the business. And although I know you guys have business backgrounds and this isn't your first rodeo, you guys are in the mix of a startup in a world that's changing daily at the moment, and you also started your business in COVID, which, I look back now and look at just how much has changed over that period of time. I mean, things like TikTok, the economy's obviously really, changing. So that's the thing I'm most excited about today. And I'm, excited to learn about, dive into your journeys before the startup, but then also dive into some of the lessons that you're learning in real time, which is, exciting. So yeah, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks,
Thank
mate.
you.
And I think, just to comment on like starting anything during COVID, I've listened to some of the people you've had on. It's really interesting to see where they go and start to really blow up, right? And, we're huge admirers of Steph Claire Smith and what Keep It Cleaner have done and, what Franks have done. There's really incredible products with the right time. And I don't think there could be a worse time to try and start anything when there's like a global pandemic, right? And, the sort of interesting observation that I had just sort of thinking about a pandemic is you typically have to worry more about, am I going to be alive than is this business going to succeed? And once you can kind of navigate that uncertainty, which is potentially your impending death, then, startup death doesn't seem as bad, right? But I would say that, at the same time, right, you have extra levels of introspection. And I think that for us, starting during a pandemic, particularly trying to work with supply chains, trying to work with international partners, trying to, get investors from overseas who pretty much think the world's changed, so are only focused on certain areas, it requires you to really think about what your brand values, what your brand is trying to do and what you think you can shift the needle with. Because nothing's more important than human life at that particular time. So once you can get over that, you've really thought about what's more important. And for us, it was like, okay, we can't even really communicate with each other as freely as we'd like. We can't see each other. I was in Melbourne. Raoul was in Melbourne. I was in Wellington. Anyone in Melbourne was going through absolute hell, right? They were really locked down. So we had to use the time to try and be extra thoughtful and then perhaps, have extra conviction in what we wanted to build. And so for us, tomorrow was really a factor of learning what those things were and then putting that out to the world.
Yeah, 100%. And I mean, that's one thing I'm excited to dive into with you guys is like the startup story and kind of how did you actually come up with the idea? Like what was the spark to get into this space? Because I get a feeling there's going to be a pretty cool answer there and some great insight because I think, and you guys can touch on this, but like when you are going through a phase like we've just gone through, it is a bit of a reset, like I think that's probably one of the biggest insights from my perspective is like, I've never really gone through a recession as an adult, or more, the kind of like 2008, I was, I can't tell you off the top of my head, but I wasn't an adult, and wasn't aware of business cycles and so on. And so it's interesting, right? Like you're going through a period where you kind of get hit with this pandemic, and then there's a lot of information out there. But the one thing that I've realized and started to feel was that the tide is turning, and so we're going to enter just another, long period of innovation, and it's going to be the start of a reset. The best times to start businesses, from what everyone says and what experts say is in a period of,
Agree.
or in that turn. So, what? Give me an insight into the startup story. Like, how did you guys begin? Where did the idea come from? And you guys, have been out and been backed and so on. So can you give us an insight into that story and how it started?
Yeah, well, at the time, Raoul and I were living together in San Francisco. We lived in the absolute hacker house, right? It was like MIT guys, people coding during the day, trying to build things, to launch into Y Combinator. Our flatmate built a venture scale business that raised $20 million sort of some months later. And, frankly, Raoul and I were both quite kind of burnt out. And, he was in New York at the time working at Uber. I had my first software company, which was venture backed. Typically you'd think things were going well. But actually we needed something to give us a bit of a break from this kind of constant, always on lifestyle. So we joined a gym. That's the first obvious thing one can do. But we joined Equinox, which I'm not sure if you're familiar with, but you don't go because it's got a bench press. You go because they have cold eucalyptus towels and they have steam rooms. And it's this really nice experience at the end of it where you get this little reward for yourself. And they provide free skincare products. And it was a well-known brand. But for us, it was what the hell is an amino acid face wash? These don't smell that good. And they actually kind of make you clammy afterwards. So we'd leave the gym feeling really sweaty. I've always had skin problems. From a young age, I had acne. It really affected my confidence. And so when we sort of looked at what I would use, and I had my whole routine planned out, and I was quite advanced in this, Raoul has this incredible mind for utility. He thinks of things as, well, we could probably take what you enjoy and make this a lot more utilitarian, right? It doesn't have to be this complex. What are the basic steps? How can you take that experience of Equinox and that idea of a spa and combine that into skincare that actually works? Why does it have to be one or the other? Why can't it be 4 seasons as well as something that a dermatologist would say works? And there are active ingredients that do that, and there are certainly experience in the products that can do that. And so our view was, let's make that happen, right? Because that should exist. And we feel that should exist because it made us feel good. And it certainly felt good for us going to the gym and having that experience. So we wanted to take that and naturally think about how we could scale it. And skincare was that category because it's a product that you can build and then release and then continue to formulate and grow off the back of and get to more people fast.
My follow-up question is going to be on brand.
Sure.
And the reason is because when I look at your product, I think what you've done really well is you've obviously seen this gap in the market, right, which is the first step of any business. But I think the thing that I'm most interested in is how you guys have seen your brand on the back of this, right? Because you just mentioned that you were quite advanced. So you guys knew what you were looking for from a product perspective from the beginning. But then obviously the next step is, all right, well, what are we wrapping around this product to actually, get it off the ground and what segment of the market are we actually really going to go for? Mm-hmm. But I want to back up before we go there because it's not every day you speak to people and they're like, yeah, we were living in San Francisco. You were working for Uber, Raoul. Yeah. And obviously yourself in a business where a venture backed software company, and you guys are young, right? In the grand scheme of things. Yeah. So I want to touch on the journeys that you were both on before that. Yeah. To give some context to how you've gotten to where you are today. And I think also talk about one of the reasons I was really excited to talk to both of you is the lessons that you're bringing into business to be able to accelerate the process. And I think the reason I am, because I've owned businesses now for a while myself, and like this being a new business for myself, it's like things are just moving quicker and you know what to do. So I'd love to touch on your journeys individually, you know, and then obviously together, and then we can start to dive into some of the principles and things that you kind of brought across with you.
Yeah, absolutely. I can go first. So I think I would describe my journey up until starting the skincare brand as the archetypical ethnic child born in Australia, get good grades in high school, go to a good university, do a commerce degree. During commerce degree, identify which career is going to make the most money. It was investment banking at that time. Get job at investment banking, work 100 hours a week, miserable. The only joy was partying on the weekend, and start to have this sort of itch and burning desire to do something with more purpose and meaning, which at that time felt like starting a business, but I didn't feel that I had the skills or the experience to go out on my own at early 20s. So spoke to another guy and he said, I've heard of this innovative, disruptive technology company that's shaking up the taxi industry, and they hire defected investment bankers to do operations. I think that's perfect for you. Google Uber, had never heard of it, tried the product out. It was incredible, applied, was fortunate enough to be one of the first, I think, 10 people in the Melbourne office. Spent a year there working on the taxi product. So at that time, Uber was actually illegal in Australia, and there was some wild stories there. And was performing well, and got tapped on the shoulder and they said, we've got this food delivery app idea. Melbourne has been greenlit as the second market in the world to test this out. Would you like to do that? So got to really go on an incredible journey, launching Uber Eats in 7 different markets across the world. That took me to America. I spent 2 years in New York, having a great time, working, partying, living that New York lifestyle. One part of the story that Lewis did miss out is when I landed in SF, not only was I burnt out, but I was physically blown out as well. And
I told him.
Lewis, being a former, let's say, semi-professional boxer with a good amateur record and a good disciplined mindset towards working out, he always had the 6-pack abs that he liked to show me, you know, after work. He said, look, we need to get you back into shape. And that was one of the other key motivators behind going to Equinox. But I think, you know, from all of these experiences, one of the key things that I learnt that was directly applicable to starting this skincare brand was, in business, a lot of the time you get presented with these very abstract problems that you might never have encountered before. And when you're facing that, sometimes you can be overwhelmed and you're sort of like, how do I even go about doing this? And so the biggest learning is to just put pen to paper and start writing down a list of ways that you can solve it. Rank that list into priorities, right? So P0, P1, P2, and just start working through the P0s. Most likely that list was probably 60% correct, 40% incorrect. At the end of that day, once you've worked through the P0s, look back and go, are the rest of these correct, or do we need to change direction a little bit? And it was really this disciplined way of taking an abstract problem and turning it into a clear set of tasks that we could do to get closer to the solution, and having the ability to reflect and redirect where we were going towards that solution. And I think that's really been, you know, drilled into me through the working experience. And one of the best ways that we sort of approach building this brand, because really neither of us have ever built a consumer brand before, but we do have the business skills. And so we can take that and apply it to a new field and have a very high degree of confidence that we'll be successful.
I love that. And so how did that, like, your previous experience in Uber, you know, is that something you learnt during those experiences? Is it something that you brought from prior experiences, and how did that play out in a sense, in your prior experiences? Because you mentioned Uber, what is now Uber Eats.
Yeah.
Like, is that something that you learnt during that time, or you took that knowledge in and that you used that to kind of launch?
Absolutely. I think one of the common things between investment banking and Uber is that nobody sits you down and teaches you how to do anything. And I think even more so with Uber, most people there didn't actually know how to launch a food delivery app because no one had ever done it before. So I walk in day one and they're like, we need 2,000 drivers onboarded and ready to deliver food in 8 weeks. You're going to figure that out. And so it's a little bit of baptism by fire, but you sort of go through by trial and error. You start trying to connect the dots. You talk to other people that have solved similar problems. So the guys that had done it for the taxi business, how did you do it? What channels did you use? What was most successful? So you start to lean on them. You do a bit of research in the market. Food delivery had been launched in America. So you start to look at what the competitors are doing there and what would be applicable. And through that experience, you definitely make a lot of mistakes. I was yelled at a lot. I remember the GM at the time had this little office that was actually open walled, and he would just rotate through the launch team. Everyone would be in there for half an hour, and maybe 2 to 3 times a week he'd be yelling my name going, what the hell is this, right? But you got to be thick-skinned and resilient because he did care about me and my development, and that was his way of managing, and I have fond memories of him, but it pushed me to then adapt and be dynamic in how I approached it. And by the end, we got to the result. A lot of things were done correctly, some things were done incorrectly, but now I can lean on that experience for tomorrow. And so once again, I would say, hopefully my process is better than it was at Uber Eats. It's still not going to be like Jeff Bezos starting his next business. That's going to be elite compared to us doing it. But I hope that over time, if I maintain that growth mindset, it will get better and better.
One last point before I want to touch on your experiences, Lewis, as well. But you mentioned a really good point there. And I think a lot of people, and this is something that I've learned, as you deal with high-level operators that have built, or they're in charge of large teams that are, at $100 million companies or, hundreds of millions, even billions. Thick skin, right? I feel like you don't get that experience in life, like being able to handle conflict, and then more importantly, understand that this person might be yelling at you, but it's not personal. Yeah. Everybody's trying to achieve something, and sometimes that's necessary. And how important was that to your growth? And, did you experience people around you that maybe didn't have that same mindset and it actually worked against them?
Yeah, I think that especially, so I think my thick skin developed in investment banking because those are super high pressure environments, very small deal teams. There's a lot on the line. Any mistake can be very costly. And the culture in that is quite ruthless and very alpha in many ways. So once again, you learn by being thrown in the deep end and surviving, and really understanding that in business, as you say, people are motivated by an objective outcome: win the deal, earn the fee, launch Uber Eats. And you have to sort of separate that from your emotions, and be willing to face some conflict, knowing that at the end of the day, you're all working towards that same outcome. I will say, caveat that every now and again you come across some psychopaths that might be motivated by other things, and be discerning and note that if you come across them, maybe they need a bit of a shakedown. But outside of that, generally speaking, most people are motivated by good intentions. And I think especially in small environments like a startup, where it's high pressure, everyone has a lot of responsibility, people don't really know exactly what the right answer is, these conflicts are going to arise. As long as they're not psychopaths, have thick skin, deal with it. and find outlets that help you deal with it, right? I think one thing I used to do was go out, drink, what most people do. And ultimately, that's not a very healthy way to deal with it. Since starting the skincare business, I've rethought how I do that. And I very much now view exercise as a powerful outlet. So if Lewis and I have a bit of yelling and conflict, I go to the gym, I lift something heavy, I go to jiu-jitsu, I go and choke someone at jiu-jitsu, which is all, acceptable there, but it's an outlet for that energy, and you come back feeling refreshed and re-energized for the next day.
Yeah, that's great advice. I think something as well that has helped me is just adopting the same mindset as the person in front of me, right? Like if you have a different mindset to them, it's going to upset you, but you realize and you start to adopt the same mindset and say, okay, well, I've got an objective too. And then it just becomes a game of strategy between both of you. And you can learn a lot that way, because you can start to look at what that person wants out of you and how you can give that person what they want. And that's how deal flow works, right? You kind of find that middle ground.
Yeah.
And then all of a sudden it's not they're yelling at me because they don't like me. Or, if you adapt that mindset, it can be that kind of, that's when you can get upset. You're like, I want this person to like me because I think that's going to help me get the outcome. When in fact, you playing on the same level and meeting in the middle is what that person wants, and kind of going up to that level at the same time. So I think it's a really interesting topic. I've especially for me, like going from, it's been a different process now where we're dealing with people that are at a much higher level than what I was in my previous business. And so like it took a bit of adapting, because you're not used to the challenge that kind of comes, but it's been great learning for me. And that's something that, obviously I think is really important when you start to deal with these high level operators. Like if you're dealing with the CEO of companies, they're going to eat 3 times a week at a minimum. They'll probably eat you alive. But if you can take that, they love that, right? They're like, that's amazing. Yeah. And I think that's what I mean by getting on their level and adopting their mindset, because that's what they want you to do. Yeah. And then they'll like you. Yeah. And so thinking I want them to like me is probably the wrong way to go about it.
Yeah, totally.
What about yourself, mate? So you coming from I'd love to hear a little bit about your previous business.
Yep.
And then what are the key learnings that you've brought into this business, and kind of...
I really think what you're doing here is important. So I might frame my journey as a function of why I think it's important that you're doing this podcast, actually. And the reason that is because when I was starting and interested in doing entrepreneurship, this didn't exist. So, I think we can all commonly agree that there's this overwhelming tall poppy syndrome that exists across Australia and New Zealand. Why do you think you can do that? You can't do that. You aren't Steve Jobs. What do you think you're doing here, right? And so collectively, I've always been inspired by wanting to build things. I just get a kick off it. I get a kick off trying stuff. I get a kick off finding that people like the stuff. And that's sort of been my collective journey from a young age. But I would say that learning to execute and building confidence is something that you have to cultivate. It doesn't just happen. For some people, it will. There'll be some guys that get out of bed and, they make Facebook, or like Bezos will look at a report and go, okay, I'm selling books because you can build a database library of books and he'll work that out. I'm not really that special, and I'm not particularly good at anything. And I think it's important to sort of be upfront about that, because really, if you're willing to keep trying, and if you're willing to persevere, and if you're willing to be persistent, you might find something that works. And, I think a lot of your guests might even fall into that category. And I think that the beautiful thing about what you're doing with this podcast is it can show other people that they also could be in that category. Yeah. So then really for me, my journey is just about constant resilience building by building constant failure loops. And I've failed way more than anything that's worked. And most of what I've done has been by mistake, but now I try to do things that I believe should exist. And if you believe something should exist, then I think the way to go about that is to listen to what Raoul says, because I guess if we were going to look at our personality types, that's like Ivan Drago, and I'm like Rocky, right? I just don't know how it works, but I'll keep pushing and keep getting hit, and he'll stay really fit, and he'll understand the methodology and everything. And I think if you can, not fight each other as Ivan and Rocky, but collaborate, then you can build great things. And so, I'm just a kid from New Zealand. The school I went to didn't have access to anything. I didn't know what an investment bank was, let alone try and apply for one. But I was told I was pretty good at writing, so I did a law degree. And 3 years deep into that, just didn't want to do it. So did anything I could to try and be involved in startups, entrepreneurship club, which I founded, try and build things on Shopify, which sold nothing. And eventually you end up in a place where you work at a tech company. And for me, that was at the eBay of New Zealand. And that sort of changed my trajectory. And I think looking for ways to change trajectory is like the main thing you should try and do if you're interested in escaping a regular pattern. Look at what could be a Archimedes lever and could help you move away from whatever it is you're trying to move away from. And for me, I thought software and technology is the one thing that if you can build a kernel of an idea, that could then move into many other voluminous idea points. And I tried a fashion marketplace like Farfetch, if you're familiar with that one.
Yep.
I did that in Australia. I took all the luxury fashion boutiques, I got them all online, I built a studio, raised a little bit of money, and it flopped. It totally flopped. And the learning is that you don't actually understand why something will work or not work until you try. And it turns out it's still cheaper to buy things in Europe, luxury fashion items, than it is in Australia. But as a function of building that, I ended up having a software technology that would actually connect retail stores to their point of sale software. Sounds very boring because it is, and it's actually very important because if you have retail stores, you need a way to connect into those retail stores from online to offline. That just didn't exist. And so again, very serendipitous, and I relied heavily on serendipity. And I think I also relied on the fact that I was going to be comfortable being uncomfortable for my whole 20s. It just didn't really matter to me if I was literally eating just chickpeas and tuna. And I think more people should be comfortable with that as well, because I think, and I was talking to somebody in the Valley who's built a $1 billion company, right? And his feedback on Australia and New Zealand is, we just don't see it enough. If you see it more, you know it can happen, right? And I think just sort of bringing it back to what this podcast does is you're seeing people do it. You're seeing what can actually happen if you get the marketing right, if you get the brand right. And more importantly, it doesn't really matter if you're going to take some, downtime in your 20s. I'm now 32. My 20s was, an exceptional amount of learning, which has resulted in the ability to build software companies now and build consumer businesses now and be able to take opportunities and assess those, and then also be able to partner with excellent people who otherwise wouldn't really look twice at you, because you need to have some kind of experience. So my journey is sort of like a mix of wanting and desiring that experience, and really much feeling excited when other people want to do that as well, and kind of seeing that there's like a kinship within that. And to be here and be able to say that to me is really important, because I think if someone watching this can see a guy from Wellington who's just really just not that special, right? Like, just let's be honest, right? I'm not that good at anything. Start companies and recruit world-class people, then all you really seem to need to do is just to start, right? And be willing to take a couple L's along the way, and then to realize that your self-worth doesn't shift with that L, right? We're kind of taught to say that it's actually, at the moment, it's like if you lose, you're a loser. But I just couldn't disagree with that idea more.
Yeah, it's such a good point, that last bit, especially around taking L's. Like, it's not attached to your self-worth, and it's actually, if you can take that mindset,
totally,
you can start to one of the other points that you mentioned, which I really love, was the evolution of your company, which was you built a company on the back of a failure.
Completely.
Right? And you kind of changed it into something that had value in a market.
Completely.
Right? And I think that's half the battle. And I think one of the key lessons that I think I took from what you just said was your idea should be based on a segment of the market, and that segment of the market, you just have to start there. And it kind of comes back to what you were saying as well, is how, multiple ways to fix this problem. And so when you go through these different iterations of how to fix this problem, you just get a little bit closer to maybe what will be this eventual service or product that will solve the problem. And then once you start to get the feedback that you might be solving the problem slightly, that's when things can really get going, and you use that feedback to compound, get competitive advantage, create moats, and just kind of keep this evolution of the product rolling. which is just great insight. I think genuinely to someone who wants to start a business it's how this started. You know, my podcast was purely an experiment to figure out how does podcast fit into the game of business? Is there something there? Or more importantly, how does content? But then podcasting just seemed to be this really efficient way to solve the problem of content, because TikTok was born and, you know, like ANZ Bank can't just go making stupid TikTok videos of their co-workers dancing. Like, it doesn't get them anywhere. So... But then NAB come out and they start a podcast, and that podcast is currently in the top 20 every week. And so, you know, having that touch point.
They come in here?
Pardon?
They come
No, but just in general. That was that. You know,
proving your thesis
that was a really
true.
big. I look at that market and just go, well, okay, well, NAB's doing it. Where's ANZ?
Got it.
Right, and if NAB's connecting with customers on that level, you know, and I just kind of look at it this way and go, okay, well, you know, is there something there? And so. But it's the idea of like, again, like we just started, we got like, cool, we'll just get a studio, we'll launch a podcast. We'll give ourselves 11 months of runway. And if we get to that 11 months and we can figure out how to monetize a podcast, or at least get one off the ground, we will know what direction we have to go in, and we'll get that insight. And so that's what we did. Awesome. And it just started from this idea, okay, well, there's, you know, this is the segment of the market. This is the kind of place we want to play in, and let's just give ourselves some time to figure it out. And then we went one direction and it was completely wrong and completely failed. But that gave us the insight to go in the direction that is now working. And so I think like that's kind of coming back to your point of, and you know, more importantly, the collective conversation of what really as an entrepreneur, kind of what your role is, and learning from that. And you know, I don't come from any formal educational background. You know, I'd say that the last 10 years has been just trying to figure it out and understand business as a mechanism, and that collectively has compounded to a point now where I feel pretty confident of the steps to take, and that's kind of what you guys are saying as well.
Yeah,
definitely.
Let's shift now to what are you guys are well and truly into a startup.
Yep.
I love what you're doing. What are some of the things you've done in the early days that have really worked? Because when I ask this question to someone who may be 7 years into the journey, what may have worked 7 years ago is not relevant right now. But I think that you guys can share some insight as to potentially what is working right now.
Well, for starters, just to sort of go back, like we thought that we should build skincare products that people would love to use because they feel amazing and they actually work. When we started with marketing, we really focused just on experience. And because our products are very masculine and we have masculine fragrances, and we designed those fragrances with, you know, the first formulator from Aesop, and we wanted to take that kind of incredible sensorial experience and give that to everyone, we had to work out what was the right messaging for that. And so initially we focused too much on senses, when a lot of young men just want to know if it's going to work. Right? They've just had such a bad experience with products that, you know, have kind of left them in the lurch. You know, women have been using skincare for so much longer. We wanted to make masculine products that are in fact genderless, but certainly at least connect and make the conversation between males and females an exciting one about skincare. So testing messages for us was about really just looking at what will people resonate with, and then just constantly put that message out. And that resulted in some incredible results, right? So for us, TikTok was something that when Raoul brought it up to me, I thought, this is just not a thing, right? This can't possibly work. But then we had, you know, videos get millions of views, virality, grew to sort of 25,000 followers on that in a short period of time. And, you know, since we launched in December last year, TikTok has just been this incredible way to spread an idea to a young community that are looking for something better. And I think the other point that's really important is we spent 2 years working on the formulations. So it wasn't really, when I talk about build things you think should exist, really look at your product and ask yourself, like, is this something that if you stack it up against any other product, it's just going to get called out? We have something called vegan collagen in our serum, right? That's made in a lab in San Francisco using actual human DNA, right? They take that protein, they put it into a thing called a centrifuge, they spin it out, and then basically they're able to replicate DNA in a 100% PETA-approved vegan way. and it's far more effective, and also like completely sustainable, because the other option is to use fish scales or cow hooves. And for us, we were cracking up, because if you read about collagen, people are just drinking this stuff, and it's fish scales and it's cow hooves, and it doesn't work, because once you orally ingest it, your stomach acid burns that down. So if you're going to make something, at least be confident that you know it's got something special to it, with ingredients that you know will work, and then be willing to test and fail and see what might take off. And I guess, like, you know, Raoul can talk about just like that experimentation process, because I'm very willing to just throw out 1,000 ideas. Raoul's very willing to measure 1,000 ideas, and I think that's a cool way to, you know, combine ideas, right?
Yeah, that would be my follow-up, is like, what's the logic that you guys use when it comes to building a product? Like, you know, like more of a process for someone to think about if they're new to business or they're going through the same thing, they've got an idea. Like, how do you iterate and measure constantly to find, you know, is this, have we, you know, how do you find product market fit?
Yeah. Well, I think the first thing that Lewis and I were very big on is finding and recruiting who we could find as the best people in the world to do the things that required skills. And so in particular for ours, you can break it down into brand design and product formulation. For the brand design, we found 2 world-class luxury creative directors based in Melbourne, Australia. They've had experience working with Stella McCartney, Raf Simons, and we go to those people because they have a real eye for high-quality luxury brand design. And the vision there was, how can we create something that feels aspirational and luxurious, but actually price it at something that's affordable and accessible for everyone? Because that for us is a real consumer arbitrage, right? You go through this full customer journey thinking, oh my God, this is going to cost me $500, and it only costs you $100, and you go, I'm buying that. That looks epic. It's going to look sick on my shelf. I love it, right? And so that for us was the brand design. When it came to the products, it was finding the formulator that had the experience. And being in Australia, we were really fortunate to be connected to the founding formulator of Aesop and the parfumist for Aesop. So Aesop have just an incredible reputation overseas. They put Australian beauty on the global map, but they're very much focused on experience. So it's all about the fragrance and how you feel when you apply the product. And so what we did is we took that experiential expertise of this team, but we injected our focus on utility, because ultimately we felt that the market was moving forward. It wasn't just about experience. People wanted skincare products that actually make your skin glow, that actually have benefits for your skin health and hygiene. So first we recruit the team, then we go through the R&D cycles. Each iteration of the formulations, I think ultimately the key word to describe it is just be obsessed, right? And this is the first time both of us are ever formulating a skincare product.
Can I just jump in quickly?
Yeah.
I know the question that everyone would be asking when they're listening to this now is, you know, what does that cost? So you know, and you know, you might have self funded this. I don't know, but that would be the question that I know is going through everyone's head, because you're going to the best creative directors in probably Australia, you know, and you're going, okay, we're going there. So is, like, what does that look like? Because that would be I know that's the question on everyone's on mouth right now. You know, that's what they're thinking.
So what I will say is we raised a modest amount of money. By no means have we gone out and done, you know, big Uber fundraising rounds. We raised a modest amount of money. But what and I've learnt a lot of this from Lewis, who I would say is one of the best maybe I've ever met at doing this, is sell people on the vision, right? And you have to believe the vision. And so if you want to start a business, first figure out what your vision is, make sure you believe in that vision, and whenever you meet someone that you're trying to recruit, sell them on the vision. Then I would also factor in that it's going to take a lot of time to convince, you know, world-class creative directors to join your team, right? It took us 4 months to convince them to join. countless coffees, phone calls, hours and hours, talking about the vision, ideas. You have to convince them that not only your vision is the right one for them to align to, but that you are the guys that are going to take their brand and turn it into something great. And the final thing I would say is be generous with equity. Because if you can get someone to buy into the vision, then you can save yourself on the cash and give them equity. But they'll only accept that equity if they believe in the vision. And so that for us was a huge part of it. Coming up with this vision, spending hours and hours talking with them, getting them to buy into the vision, getting them to believe what we believed. And once you can do that, you can recruit anyone in the world to join your team.
Yeah, and the reason I wanted you to touch on that is because I feel it's such a, like for someone starting a business, they don't necessarily think that way unless you've had previous experience. Like you just kind of think, oh, well, I have to self-fund this. And you can kind of forget that really you just have, and we talked about it before, the segment of the market, the idea, how we solving the problem. And then once you kind of get a gauge on that, you really can go out there and create magic. And that's a loose term, but it just means that you can make things happen. And I think that's really, because I know that when I asked you that question, I knew that that's what you guys did. I can see just through our conversations, even before we kind of jumped on the podcast. But I like that because I think that I know that I didn't do that in my early days. And it was because I had no previous experience working for any company, but I started a business. And so you think you have to do everything yourself and everything's self-funded and you don't give away equity and you got to hold that for dear life and you don't realize that there's more than, there's more than that out there. And I think that's a really great point.
Yeah, absolutely.
I would add that, one thing as well is it's not just giving equity to the creatives, it's also getting the manufacturers to go to do smaller runs, right? You don't have to go out there. A lot of people that I talk to say, oh, I need to make 50,000 of these or 100,000 of these. You can start smaller, and when you get traction, up the MOQs, up the volume that you're building with. That's smarter. Do things that don't scale originally, and there's a great blog on this, and you can Google it. But I would also look at it and think, most of the things you need to build today do not require immense amounts of money. I also have a software company which has cost me nothing, but will generate substantial monthly revenue just by itself. You can do many things at once because the access to the tools and the talent and the skills that you need are becoming ubiquitous. It's no longer the case that a software engineer is this heralded wizard. OpenAI just released a tool that will make, basically a lot of industries redundant, right? Lawyers, journalists, a lot of these tools that require objective outputs can now exist. What can you build off the back of that makes an interface? In the case of our products, we wanted these to be luxurious feeling, right? And just to be really upfront, when people make products, they ask you, how do you want to price this? So they look at the price and they sort of reverse engineer it. We said a much higher price point, and then once they made them, we dropped our prices entirely. So be mindful of what that will do to your margins, but at the same time, think about what you believe can happen in the long tail. And, the result of some, many thousand customers so far are telling us that actually, hey, these feel incredible and they're so affordable. It's yeah, well, shit, because, they're meant to be 5 times the price. We thought we were going after a different segment. So we're glad you like them.
Hey team, if you're enjoying this episode, please remember to follow or subscribe on whatever platform you're tuning in on. We do not want you to miss out on any of the education we're putting out. Now, back to the episode. I hope you enjoy. I just wanted to take a little bit of your time to say thank you to our major sponsors, BizCover. They are powering the podcast currently. They are the reason we get to travel and have all of the amazing guests on. But they're also a really amazing company. They're a business insurer that are insuring Australians all over the country and making sure that if something does go wrong in their business, it's not painful and it's not deadly. If you're an e-commerce business, having insurance is really, really important because anything that goes wrong with your product and you are liable, and with the way the economy is currently, and manufacturing and shipping and all of these things and potentially stock going missing, just having your business covered could save you a lot of pain. So if you're interested in getting a quote, it's super easy. It only takes, you can get insured in under 10 minutes and there's no paperwork involved. Their link is in the show notes. Go check it out and get yourself a better deal. No, 100%. I mean, I can completely I can feel that deep in my soul, because we're almost in a similar position. You know, like I remember sitting on a call, an agency hit us up to partner or, you know, to be an affiliate type thing. And they hit us up and they're like wanting to know about our service and stuff. And they're like, how the hell do you make money? And they were talking about studio time. And similar to what you were saying before with the arbitrage, it's kind of like, well, you know, we think we've got a model that can deliver the same quality that a studio might, but at half the price. And we think we've got the unit economics to really make that work. And he kind of didn't pay it any respect. And it's similar to what you guys are saying because we try to give this luxurious feel, this high-end quality product, but we want to do it at a price that makes it scalable for the client. Right, because that's what really matters. And if we can achieve that, eventually, we'll have that power. So I think it's like, I love what you're saying with that, because I think I can definitely feel that myself. And I think that what you were saying before around that arbitrage is a great strategy, because especially in skincare, like a lot of companies have had their way for so long, right? And I think, you know, when you want to penetrate a market, you've got to have a strategy. And so you got to find the weakness. And so that's kind of like, I love that you guys are saying that. But I think coming back to where we were before, because I kind of took us off track a bit, but I thought it was a good point. Like as I said, because I think, I know that I've come from the side of the fence where you don't have that knowledge and you're not making those moves. And I think that's one thing that, you know, when I have conversations with people, I'm like, oh, you could be doing this, and you can, you know, there's other ways to get this going quicker than just self-funding and don't, you know, it might take you 5 years to get to this point of critical mass where you can do it a lot sooner and a lot quicker, which I knew that we were kind of past that point, but I want to come back to what we were saying before that.
About the products, right?
Yeah.
So I think the key word I would say two things. Number one, obsession, obsess over the details. And number two, coming back to that point around taking an abstract problem and turning it into a list, right? And so with that, take product formulation, something we'd never done before. What are the key things in a product formulation? It's the ingredients, the texture, the fragrance, what does it actually do for your skin? So the benefits, the packaging, how does it dispense? Map out all these different factors. Maybe there's 10, there's 15, right? That forms your framework. So now all of a sudden you've gone from having no framework to a framework. So when the first formulation version comes back, sit down with your framework, work through each line item. Do we like the fragrance? Do we like this? Do we like this, right? Keep an open mind and think about what your customer wants from all of these different touch points. So just to focus on our products, for example, with the texture, we looked back at our experience. When I started using the skincare at Equinox, I'd be hot and sweaty after a workout. I'd have a cold shower. I'd put on this really thick, oily moisturizer. I'd think that my body had cooled down. I'd step out into the Californian sun and I'd be glistening in sweat, oil, grime. Terrible experience. So every time I got the formulations back, I'd go, is this light, fast absorbing? Because I think my experience is probably going to be indicative of a lot of young men's experience. If you're using a moisturizer after going to the gym, you don't want it to be thick, oily, and give that post-gym sweat experience. With the fragrance, we thought, this is a really funny story, actually. When we started, we'd go to Sephora and buy, 50 different cleansers and try all of these ones. And Lewis once came back with this cucumber cleanser and he said, this one's awesome. We should make ours smell like cucumber. Try it. It's in the shower. I go and I try it and I start dry reaching at the smell. I realize because it's evoking a memory of gin and tonics with cucumbers, which is the last thing that I want to smell in the morning before work. So then we researched it. We're like, why am I remembering that? And we realized that fragrance was actually really linked to your memories. So human beings remember through fragrances. So that then made us realize that we should, if we're solving a product to cater to everyone, it shouldn't smell like anything anyone has smelt before. Because if it smells like lemons, one person might like it, one person might hate it. So we created really unique designer fragrances. So we sort of mapped out the factors, and that's how we, start to turn the abstract into an objective process, and we just obsessed over it.
Yeah, we spent thousands on skincare. We probably close to like $5,000 on different skincare products, to a point where it's like I've tried every major brand you could probably think of. And I think, we've found that, like, for the most part, people have been ignored because it just assumes, they'll just like that, throw that at them, that'll be fine. And certainly even with females that use our products, they just love the price point and the simplicity. It's numbered 1 to 4. It's everything you need for a elite skincare routine that gives you, clear skin, reduces redness, removes fine lines. Like, these are things people care about. But at the same time, it should feel amazing. And that's something Raoul's just incredible at, which is taking, like, perhaps it was like hundreds of products, right? Like, and looking at it and going, okay, this should not be $700. What have they put in here? Like, it's crazy what skincare companies do. And because we don't come from that cosmetics background, we just resent the fact that people like sell it as snake oil, where we feel like, okay, what's fair? What speaks to, all of the value points that we have as a business, and then what's something that we can scale based on just learning exactly what customers will like from there.
And I think, can you guys touch on the guiding light here? Because I think, like, that's, you're obviously talking about iterations of a product, measuring. We talked about price point and stuff like that as well. But, like, one of the questions I had earlier, which I don't think we really covered, but was more around brand and, like, messaging and the segment of the market. Like,
Absolutely.
That's obviously been the guiding light for you guys. Do you want to touch on how that's guiding you in real time, going through that process of iteration to create this product? Because you're talking about price points, you're talking about simplicity, you're talking about all these things, but really there is a guiding light there driving a lot of those decisions in those particular experiences and things that you kind of were mentioning before.
Yeah, well, we really believe that you can kind of start your day fresh anytime you want, right? And that the idea of a opportunistic and optimistic future is the best way to have an outlook going forward. Mm-hmm. Because you can choose to be cynical and you can choose to have a view that things aren't going great, but the idea behind tomorrow is that you can start afresh. And we want that to be something that comes across in our brand, in our packaging, and in our formulations. Because even if it's just like a small win, which is washing your face, putting on some moisturizer, and looking up and actually realizing, okay, I look pretty good now. I've got a little bit of a glow on, and I can go out and go to that job interview, or I can go out and play on the field. That's enough. And it doesn't have to be this like major shifting thing to make you want to go out and do something big. It can be a small win. And personally, I've used skincare every day since I was 13, and it's always been my secret little win. It's been that thing that makes me feel good. If I was going to like a huge venture capital meeting, or meeting like a exceptional CEO, this is that little win that no one knows about, right? This is that little thing that I have for myself. And so when we build products, we think that they should be like a ritual, and that 4 steps takes a minute, right? And within that, you're starting to give yourself a meditative experience. And that little meditation can just be putting your skincare on. It doesn't have to be incense lighting, candles on, curtains closed. It can just be getting ready for work or going before bed. And our brand represents that. And it represents how we feel about the world as well. And particularly when we work with like Jack Ginnivan or Tai Tuivasa, these guys can take pretty substantial pressure and then be able to be happy the next day. And there's a reason that is. There's a reason that exists. They have their own rituals. And for us to be a part of that experience for them, I think it's something everyone can have and everyone should have. And so what we've done is given that to everyone. And, when we have these DMs, we get like hundreds of these DMs from, young people saying, I feel incredible. I didn't know that skincare was something that could just make me feel better. And that to us is a guiding principle for everything we do.
And it's one thing to add to that. When we sort of reflected, why is this, right? We sort of look at the current state of affairs in Australia, America, the UK, and the developed world as on the Maslow's hierarchy of needs. Basically, everything has been taken care of. And so we're now at the point of self-actualization, right? Our food, our safety, our drink, our social, everything is, fully optimized to the nth degree. So now it's about self-actualization and finding your purpose in the world. And you're not going to achieve your purpose in the world if you have sleep under your eyes and you feel grimy, right? It's such a simple thing of refreshing your face, moisturizing it, putting on a serum that completely changes your perspective and mindset. It makes you confident, not only in the way you look, but in the way that you feel after going through this routine, much in the same way we think about brushing our teeth, right? It's almost gross to think about stepping out of the house without brushing your teeth. There was a period in society where people didn't brush their teeth, and then that happened. And we think about skincare as that next step for people. You step out of the house, your skincare has been done, you are now ready to go and do whatever it is that your purpose is in life. And so we sort of work back from that. We're here to provide people with a routine to support them in their journey of self-actualization.
It's such a great way to think about building a product, isn't it? The ritual, for me, what you're saying at the moment is my haircut. I have to get one every 2 weeks because I'm on camera. And if I get on, beyond 2 weeks, I'm like, fuck, I look like shit, or I'm not going to be confident in even presenting, or having conversations, and it's such an interesting way to look at things is great businesses are built on the back of products that become a part of humans' rituals.
Definitely. And you said, what changes between say 2008 and now. Our observation is we've moved away from the things economy to the feelings economy and the experience economy. So instead of the item making me feel good, what I do for myself makes me feel well. So I'd rather invest in myself as the new luxury. And, typically people are doing that across many different avenues right now. I think a haircut's a perfect example of that. And good for you. So you should. And I think we're sort of taught to feel like these little investments in ourselves aren't okay, but we're fortunate that we live in a time that we can make these investments, and we should, because what's more important than confident people in a world like today? What's more important than just having the ability to get up and try something and know that you're ready for the day? And I think if we could cultivate more of that confidence, then the future's looking great. And, if we can be a small part of that just by giving someone a nice smelling foam cleanser and a serum that makes you glow, then I'll be happy. And I believe that should exist. And I resent that all these fantastic young people who have all these excellent ideas don't have perhaps the confidence they should have. So then when we partner with athletes and we partner with, successful people and, are mentored by them, we want to involve their conversation. So our community is about that self-improvement, that constant confidence that is only cultivated. It's just not there. I don't think anyone wakes up with that. And, I certainly don't, right? I put some serum on downstairs in your bathroom before I came on this, right? I felt good. That's okay.
Yeah, for sure, 100%. One thing I'm looking at with you two, which I love seeing, is you obviously can see that you've also mentioned this, but you're a storyteller, can sell the vision and obviously the product orientated. How important is it, whether you're in a partnership or not, but to have both of those sides taken care of in a business? Because I know that for me, I'm very much a detail on the product kind of person as well. But I'm actually not a detailed person. So working on the product is probably not my skill set. I can definitely sell it. But I've got people in my team and my partner as well are very good on the detail side. So can you talk to that and just how important that's been for you guys in the early days?
Super important. I think we think about it, it's like a sports team, right? You don't have two full forwards. You have one full forward and one ruckman, right? You need to have complementary skill sets. I think the challenge in business sometimes is firstly that people don't actually know what their skill set is. So then you don't know, and it's sometimes difficult to identify what someone else's skill set is. So when you get into business with someone, you don't know whether you have complementary or overlapping skills. I think the advantage that we had is we were actually friends for quite a few years before we started the business. We used to talk about business, we used to go out, we used to eat together. And so I started to understand what Lewis's strengths were. He saw mine. He used to live with a gentleman that I worked with at Uber, and I'm sure they spoke a lot about me behind my back to learn a bit more about my profile. And then we lived together, right? And I don't think there's any better way to learn about someone than living with them, right? Starting a business is a big thing. So, I mean, if you're going to commit to starting a business with someone, live with them for 6 months, really get to know them, see what they're like in the morning, the night, because you're going to be talking to them most of the day. And in doing that, we see our complementary skill sets, and that's really a synergy, right? Because that's going to make the duo a lot more powerful than if we were both just super visionary, but no one could put together the to-do list for what we need to do for the day. Then nothing would get done. And I think the other thing is, at the end of the day, it's not just about the destination, it's about the journey. And so it's awesome to work with someone that's good at something you're not good at, because you'll learn. And learning's fun and you improve. And so I'd say, I was terrible at coming up with this vision or convincing someone to believe in this idea that wasn't there. It was a future idea, right? But Lewis coached me. I learned through observation. Similarly, maybe Lewis's checklist skills weren't that good, and he learned from me how to put together a good checklist. And
learn heaps.
It's yeah.
Well, let me tell you what I learned from like a Harvard-educated coach, but really it's like a shrink. You think you're gonna, and I saw this guy just after my last software company, so I was very lucky to kind of take these learnings. Typically, when somebody is upset with you, or there's a sort of anything aggravating, it's not personal, it's a projection of some kind. So it's easy to take a confrontation and then want to push back with your own view of why they're wrong and you're right, right and wrong, which builds this total wall of self-righteousness, and nothing gets done. And I think a really simple framework for like working with anybody is asking, am I trying to be effective with them, or am I trying to be right? And in most cases, you don't need to be right. There's just no outcome that really matters for you to be right in, other than to fuel your ego. So when you work with someone, and especially with both of us being very like disagreeable people and like very willing to dig our heels, and a lot of it was us just having to grow up and realize, hey, we're fucking arguing a lot and we're fighting on this stuff, when really like we both have a shared outcome together. We both want to win. We both want to build something we're proud of. And actually, we both like each other, right? And it's easy because this is kind of like a marriage, right? A partnership does that. You're going to have to tell people personal things and build trust as well. And I think on that kind of, more emotional side, you have to realize, no, like that's done. This idea of like be a stoic general, like there's times for that when you're at war, but you're not always at war. It's not a constant war. It's really just a case of being supportive as well, and being willing to ensure that person gets your support in a way that encapsulates what a partner should do for them, right? And sometimes Raoul needs a hug. So if he needs a hug, give the guy a hug.
No, I mean, it's a good point. And I think that's one of the biggest things in having a successful partnership, whether it's, life partner, business partner, whatever it is like you learn more about yourself through those moments, and you have to be pretty introspective, because what you're saying is true. I come from I would say in my early days, I moved out of home really early at the age of 18, and you kind of, when you're that old and you kind of have to figure out how to pay bills and rent and so on, for me in the early days, it very much was war. It was like every day was a grind, and there was part times that were very, very hard.
You were the only owner as well, right?
Pardon?
Was it just you?
Yeah, in the early days, 100%. And so, but even just more around the fact of moving out of home, right? It was like, you kind of have to learn all these things on the fly, and if you haven't been taught them. But the biggest lesson I learned was when I got a partner, and even just in business, is like, what got me to where I am is not going to get me to where I need to go. And so a lot of that is like, I was fighting everything as if it was a war. And so when you get into a relationship or thing and you try to, you like what you were saying, this kind of stoic general, that's what got me through those early years. But that's not gonna, like if I want to be a great father, if I want to be a great partner, if I want to, bring a partner into the business and we want to operate effectively, you can't fight every battle with that
Yeah.
mindset, because it
Yeah.
just will not work. You'll drive more people away from you than you will be able to get them on the ship. So what you guys are saying is just such a great lesson of personal growth. And that was going to be my next question for you, is on a note of personal growth, what have you two learned individually that has made you better entrepreneurs, in the last 3 years together?
Yeah, I think definitely is moving away from pure stoicism, which we both can be, and we've both read Aurelius, and we like the book Meditations, is empathy. And it doesn't just mean to each other or to our partners, it means to ourselves and it means to our customers, because I think that if you can't really be happy and love yourself in the sense that, things go wrong, and if you wear that on your shoulders by yourself, it's going to be really hard for you to move forward. It's going to be really hard for you to be focused and present, because you're just grounded by, negative emotion. And empathy allows you to realize that's happening and address it versus sort of push it to one side. And mostly what people are going to do is just like try and wear that themselves. We've been pretty good at going, and this was something as recent as last year, going, look, man, I think we both need a break. We've been going at this for 3 hard years of war. What do you reckon? Should we have a holiday? Is that all right? And it's like, we're like apologizing to each other for wanting a holiday. I go to Europe, he goes to the United States, we come back and it's like, what? Why didn't we do this? And so you kind of connect like brain with heart. And when you have that level of clarity, you don't actually need to stop, because you know that stopping is just part of the whole journey. It's not like, has the fire, been put out? The fire's always going, but you got it under control. And I think empathy lets you control fire more than emotion and stoicism do, because if you're too emotional with fire, then house burns down, as they say. If you're too stoic with fire, you just don't really.
There's no light.
There's no light. You need a bit of empathy to understand yourself.
Love that. I love that.
Yeah, I would say the biggest learnings, in addition to all of that, which I agree with, is, and we're huge on this, is invest in your health. And I think that what we've learned through this journey, first of all, starting off when we were in New York and SF, and we were still doing the go out every weekend, have 20 beers, eat the burgers, wake up on Monday feeling shit, going to bed at 2 a.m., doing emails till 1:30, all that sort of stuff. It's very amateur. It's what you do as a kid. I think we have grown up during this journey. We now hold each other accountable. 8 hours of sleep. Just getting 8 hours of sleep completely changes your mindset for the day. Get the sleep. Find an outlet. Lewis loves running. I love jiu-jitsu and martial arts. We both love lifting weights. Get your workout in every day. Diet, Eat healthy, right? Have cheat meals, but in moderation. Once a week, go out for a pizza, burger, whatever, but take care of your health. Invest in supplements, obviously invest in your skincare. But, the whole package is going to make you feel better. And when you feel better, it's amazing how, when I reflect back on investment banking, your mood is so determined by your sleep, right? Just if you're tired, you're going to get moodier with people, short-tempered. You get into conflicts over stuff that you shouldn't get into. And I look back on that period where you were sleeping 2-3 hours a night, just the tiniest things would trigger you. Now you get 8 hours of sleep. The amount of fires and curveballs, there was a period during COVID where we were like, every morning we're going to wake up and there's going to be a new black swan event, a new 3-month delay. Someone's going to let us down. But you can deal with it because you feel good. You're like, it is what it is. That's the reality. How do we move forward accepting that that's the reality? So really, we hold each other accountable to that. Take care of your health.
Our biggest flex is us sleeping. It's like, how many sleeps do you, like, how many 8-hour snaps do you get, right? And it's like, we're always getting 7-8 hours. So it's sort of like our biggest flex. And I would actually say that we have more issues to deal with daily than we did pre-launch during COVID, because we're scaling, right? We have thousands of customers that, want more products. We have ambassadors we have to work with. We have to talk about retail supply chains. Like, these are things that typically are extremely stressful, but nothing feels stressful if you've had an 8-hour sleep. Guarantee if you get that down to 5 or 4, it might feel a little different. And there are times where that's going to happen. So, like, don't give yourself anxiety about thinking you need to sleep like 8 hours, otherwise you're failing, because that's a feedback loop that's not helpful. But realize that in the long run, there are sort of basic foundations. And I love this idea. It's like, before you're the CEO or a founder of a company, be like the CEO of yourself, right? And like, what would a CEO have for himself? It'd be like 8 hours sleep, a meaningful relationship with friends, connection with family, healthiness with respect to food, and just like some outlet for joy, right? That makes you happy. And whatever that is, you should do that. It shouldn't be just like one or the other.
Yeah, I think it's such an important, like figuring out what you value, you know what I mean? Like, I think that's part of that process is like, we live in a world where social media paints a picture of what success should be. And you guys coming from Silicon Valley, I'm sure, that's one of the stereotypes that for probably from 2000 to 2000 and maybe 14, 15 was pretty much don't sleep. And, it still goes on today. You hear kind of like stories of Elon and stuff like that. But I think like Elon he's amazing, but, not everybody needs to be Elon. And I think like that is something to figure out in a sense is like, there's more than one way to do things, and you can have success doing it in multiple different ways and achieve progress. I think the one thing with humans is like, you give yourself, is it the law? And it's like you give yourself 16 hours and you'll do it in 16 hours. If you give yourself an hour, you do it in an hour. So, that's actually something that Elon preaches himself. And so the idea of you can achieve, if like you don't need to just run off 3 hours sleep, you can do it you can have 8 hours worth of sleep. And if you give yourself X amount of time to get the work done that you need to, instead of saying, well, no, I need to be up at 4 a.m. and I need to finish at 12, inevitably, if you give yourself a period to kind of get the same amount of tasks done, you more than likely can do that. So it's an interesting one, and I think it's a constant journey. And I think as you get older, you start to value different things.
Definitely.
Like I'm sure that in the early days of your journeys as well, like, you were mentioning, Raoul, that you were doing those things and I was too, and that's starting to change now. So I think it's a really interesting conversation that.
Yeah. Well, I can say, just my 20s and my last startup was 3 to 5 hours, and I get more done in a day with 8 hours sleep than I ever did.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's because, frankly, you're just driven by just like an anxiety that you think you need to keep working. But like the science is proven. Like it's like you got 4 hours of deep work available to you. And I know people that are sort of like tier ones, like MBA from Stanford, that are like, I can work for 2 hours straight and then I need a break, right? So, I think people need to be less hard on themselves. And I like what you said about have values. And I'm curious to see what you mean by that. But for me, what's more important than my work or my output or any potential success that we have, and even just as we have success now, is that the value for me isn't the success. So when something goes really well or something goes really bad, I practice success or failure amnesia, because both are just learnable, unpackable events. What's more important is like, what's my value system that I look at every day? And for me, what I value is like building things, having impact. And that doesn't have to mean that I'm going to Mars. It can mean that, one person messages us on Instagram to say, hey, my skin's clear. I feel good, right? And then help others. Because ultimately, I think it just feels good, like sharing stories and, helping other people. I think that's like a very easy way to feel good about yourself. And maybe for others that's, different. But if you can determine what those values are, then, build around that, not around like a set goal. Because then, of course, you'll start sleeping 1 hour or 2 hours a night.
Yeah, exactly. And look, I think there's times for that, but it's not every day and it's not even every week. Like it's like there's going to be times where you have to push, and that's a reality. But I think there's also, you like, again, understanding what you value. If you're always doing that and that's what you value, then that might align. Now, is it healthy long term? We know that that's not going to be the case. But I also think, like, you're right. Like, for me, my biggest learning, I would say, over the last 3 to 4 years is just understanding what I value and revisiting that constantly. Pardon?
What do you value?
I had a realization that, and I use just one simple phrase, and it's to be the greatest dad in the world. And that is in the workplace. So, you know, like if my kid was following me around in the workplace,
That's cool.
how would, you know, not how would they view me because they're a child. More importantly, how would that affect how they grow up?
Yeah.
And it's every relationship I have, I think about that term.
Awesome.
Right. And that's just a really simple way for me to understand who I am, what I value, how I treat people, how I go about business, like I don't, like it's like, you don't want 20 years later for an article to come out of, your dad's ripped people off his whole life. Do you know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and it just kind of is like this guiding light. It brings me back and it helps me understand what do I value, right? So do I chase this thing because of what everyone else thinks about me, or do I chase this thing because of what my child will think of me? And it's just like a massive shift in like, okay.
You've just had a child, right?
We're due I'm going to be a first-time dad
Because really?
In June. So,
and that's what shifted your thinking?
Yeah, for probably the last 4 years,
Awesome.
so.
Awesome.
But yeah, so it's interesting, and that's what I mean by understand what you value, You don't need to be Elon.
Yeah.
You just don't. Like, you're not going to be Elon. Like, there's going to be one of Elon every 40 years.
True.
And but you got to be, and you got to understand what you value. And I think that's something that's really important.
And there's just like, let alone being Elon, like there's more than likely you're going to fail, right? On a scale of like 0 to 1, there are way more chances something's going to not go your way, that you're going to fuck it up, than you are going to get it right. So if you're trying to be Elon and if you're constantly failing, that's not going to feel very good, right? But if you have a value system, if you have a view to try and improve, then like as you do fail, inevitably those will be unpackable and learnable events. And I think now we're moving away from just like the service-orientated culture where you just have to try and like be in a career. I think young people, as long as they take that mindset, will end up getting paid to do something because they've had that experience. So, the beauty of it now is like, if I was like 20, I wouldn't care about failing at all, because maybe I'll get a job working like here at the podcast studio. Maybe I'll get an internship with the skincare guys, because I would rather have a person that's tried and failed at 100 things than someone that hasn't tried anything, but they're just like a corporate person, or they have just like not taken any risk, because life is really ultimately risk, right? And if you don't have like a value system that gives you an opportunity to see that, because we are running out of things to do, right? Like AI is going to take over. Like let's just be honest. Like that's going to happen. You need to have some value to share, and that will only be experience. So true.
We're going to dive into quickfire.
Let's do it.
Which is, you guys have listened to a few apps?
Yep.
Yeah, so quickfire is broad questions, good answers.
Yep.
But deep learning at the same time.
Let's do it.
One piece of advice for your younger self.
Look, don't worry about the outcome not being exactly how you want it to be. I know you're a perfectionist, but you're not perfect, and you're going to get it wrong way more than you think, and that doesn't need to be painful. It doesn't need to be whipping yourself every time it goes wrong. Just go ahead and do that.
I love that.
I would tell myself, be true to what you want to do, not what you think others expect you to do. And that will actually lead to a much more fulfilling journey in life.
Where does that learning come from for you?
I think that, I was the type of person that fell into the sort of, what is expected of me. If get good grades, then do this. If you do this, what's the best thing to do from there? And I actually sort of characterize a large part of my career as optimizing for the sexiest CV, like to have on LinkedIn just the dopest brands. And look, it actually did equip me with some incredible experiences in life, but it was also potentially not completely true to what I actually wanted to be doing. And even outside of the workforce, just social life, what hobbies you have, always too worried about what other people thought and how what you chose impacted your identity. reality is people think about you for 2 seconds a day max. No one's thinking about me for most of the time, right? I'm thinking about myself. Maybe my mum and dad think about me a little bit more than the average. Even they, I bet, probably don't think about me that much anymore either. And so now that I've understood that, I would be redefining my choices based on what I want to be doing and far less worried about the identity that I'm trying to create for other people to care about.
Yeah, no, I absolutely love that answer. What advice would you give to someone who's just starting a business?
I think that you don't need as much planning on the immense details as you think. Raoul will actually add to this, but I think that basically you need to just start. And basically you need to work out really quickly how you're going to generate revenue tomorrow and ignore every other part of the noise. Because when you start a business, you're default dead, right? You don't have any revenue, you don't have any traction. And if you fundraise, you're even more dead because now you owe people money and now you actually have shareholders that you're accountable. So that's even worse, in my opinion. I think there are enough tools, enough resources, and enough ways to go to market in a very efficient way that you just need to start, and you need to stop focusing on noise and stop focusing on what you think might happen and just go and prove that thesis is ever true or false. You'd say some planning behind the chaos, right?
Yeah, I would say some planning behind the chaos for sure, but the other piece I would say, and it's funny because a girl actually asked me this exact question. She works at Wesfarmers in the corporate M&A team. She's been there for 3 years. She sees what I'm doing. She finds that very exciting and inspirational. How do I start? And what I said to her is just start. Side hustle. I think that's a buzzword, but it's actually a great phrase because when you're in the corporate world, you think that outside of 9 to 5, you can't do anything, that mornings you shouldn't be working, evenings you shouldn't be working, weekends you shouldn't be working. But the reality is with an iPhone and a laptop, you can start a side hustle whilst you're in that corporate role. And you can do that to validate your idea very quickly. And as Lewis mentioned, like it's never been easier to start a website with Squarespace. It's never been easier to start an Instagram account, take content with an iPhone camera. We all have the tools available to us and the capital available to us to start your idea. If it's an e-commerce brand, it doesn't cost that much. Do it. Do the side hustle. Validate the idea. If it has legs, if it has traction, now think about quitting your job and jumping into it. But just get started and accept the reality that maybe your idea is going to fail, but that's okay, right? It's fun. That's a part of life. Have a go, invest your money into it. If it fails, reflect on why it failed, try again. It'll only get better.
But we actually invest in and start like businesses as well, right? So I have a software company that started as a spreadsheet that I got businesses to use, and I asked them, would you use this and pay X? And the answer was yes. So then that validated that I needed a software engineer. Find a software engineer, get them to build it. And then you've got what was a spreadsheet that anyone can use to build with free resources online, and you have a business idea. So I think too much exists in the idea phase. Most of what you want to do can be done now with far less resources. And Moore's law of everything and the rate of technology doubling has completely surpassed our expectations with things like OpenAI. If I was telling someone to start something today, it's like, what are industries that could use better framing of language and better framing of ideas to just improve the way they communicate? And how can you do that with OpenAI? You don't need to build intense database-driven products. And I've done all that stuff, and it's heavy, and it didn't even work out as great as I would have liked. And now simple solutions that basically are prettier spreadsheets still need to exist. I think now that everyone uses software particularly, there's a need to make things more beautiful. So how can you empathize so deeply with someone that you can give them something that they think should exist? And then what's the minimum amount of work you have to do to give them that? Or perhaps the minimal desirable amount is the better way to think about it, because we're way past the MVP. That's not enough. People expect more. They expect what they at least desire. And if you can give them what they desire, then you can work out around you who needs to be involved to help that happen.
Wow, I really love that. That's fire. That last bit.
Cheers, man.
I think. I mean, look, that's a whole new conversation. We could probably do another podcast on just where we think the world's going and you know, with the business ideas of the future. So, I would love to, but maybe we save that for another day. Last question. Most important trait that a founder must have for success, and why?
Well, for me, it's very simple. I think if you want to be a founder, you need to have resilience, and you need to have perseverance and persistence. And like, I know that's not just one thing, but those traits for me compound, and they compound because the more resilient you become, the faster you can take a no from a business executive, from a sales call, from a supply chain, and move on. And perseverance is such that if you can survive long enough, you'll find a way to win. And look at Airbnb. Those guys sold cereal to get to where they were. Most companies don't have a simple upward trajectory, so you just need to persevere. And persistence is important as well, because in any environment, people are going to say no to you more than they're going to say yes. And they're not saying no because they think it's crap. They're saying no because it's not right at this moment, the best thing for them. And maybe ultimately it never will be, but if you don't persist and ask more people, you'll never get anywhere with the company. We started a skincare business during a pandemic. Do you have any idea how many people told us we shouldn't do that? Just like everyone. TikTok won't work. No one uses TikTok. And it's like, that's our main channel. Like, we grow really big on TikTok. And it's like, it's because, young people use it. It's like, everyone in retrospect can tell you why something didn't work, but no one will tell you at the time that you should persist. So isn't that kind of like a weird paradox? So just persist.
So true. Very true.
Yeah, I think just building on what Lewis said, it is to be a cockroach. And I think the cockroach is the best analogy for this for two reasons. Number one, the cockroach is resilient. You can try and squash it, you can try and kill it, but that thing keeps coming back, keeps moving. I think Brian Chesky, the founder of Airbnb, his early investors described him as a cockroach. They're like, this guy will just not go away. He kept coming back, and he made it, right? And so I think that's the first attribute of a cockroach. The second one is that cockroaches do not give a shit what you think about the way they look or the decisions that they make, right? They're the ugliest little creatures that have outlived Homo sapiens and human beings, and they're here for a reason, right? And I say that because my experience in particular, leaving a good job at Uber to tell people that I was going to start a skincare brand, raised a lot of eyebrows. Even my parents were like, are you okay, son? Is everything all good in your head? Friends from the corporate world, like, what the hell do you know about skincare? What do you know about, Facebook, Instagram? When you tell people about TikTok, they're like, that's so stupid. Don't people just dance on that platform? Ultimately, it's because people are not thinking about you for that much. And I think to a degree, especially in Australia, there is a little bit of tall poppy syndrome. When you step out of the cookie cutter mold and you're a little bit different, people's initial reaction is, how do I sort of cut this person down, or how do I challenge their thinking because they're not doing what the herd is doing, right? And so you got to be a cockroach. You don't care what they think about you. You just have to really realign your self-identity to only worry about what you want to do and just keep moving forward. And ultimately, when you succeed, you see that all of those people look at you with admiration, right? And it's probably coming from a place of fear as well for them, where they go, wow, this guy's just making some crazy decisions. But when it does succeed, then you have people from West Farmers going, can you tell me how you did it, right? I want to start a business. How do you do it, right? And you start to mentor people. So I think it is to be a cockroach.
I love that. Be a cockroach. No, preach. I love that. I think it's so important. It's coming from someone who's running a podcast agency, which, isn't of the norm. So I think that's great advice, because I think you have to be, and especially most people when will tell you to take the road that's easy to travel, when in fact most of the time you have to take the road less travelled, and most people around you will tell you to be safe and play it safe, and inevitably the cockroach meant that as a concept is amazing, because I think it provides valuable lessons on what it really takes to start and grow a business, because you're going to get a lot of no's, and you're going to get a lot of people saying that you're crazy.
Can you imagine if you listened to people, if they said, hey, podcasting doesn't make sense, there's the radio, right? And you just listen to them. It's just ridiculous, right? You have to.
Oh, well, that's what I mean. Like, people in the early days were like, well, what do you do? Like, and they still do. It's kind of like, oh,
it's
cool, like thumbs up and so on. But
watch where this is in 5 years, and then they'll understand, right?
Yeah, exactly. And I mean, that's probably a big lesson for people, because I know that for me in the early days, I probably wouldn't have done it. Like I just would have been like, oh shit, like, no, I'm not going to do this. But now that you've been through it a fair bit and you kind of understand it, it's a lot easier for you to make those decisions. And, not everyone's going to understand. And that's why business is probably it can be such a lonely journey a lot of the time, because most people don't understand what you're going through. The conversations that you have at family events or at events in general that aren't around business owners. That's why when you get around business owners, you feel at home, right? And you love the conversations, and it's a bit different, because most other conversations are, and it's not to say that there's anything wrong with those people or those conversations, but they're just like having a conversation with someone who doesn't own a business about, or isn't in a business, or and so on, is it can be difficult at times, because you don't feel that connection, and they kind of don't understand what you're going through, which is the toughest part of starting. Especially in the early days, you're starting a business and you don't have any other friends that run a business, and nobody understands what you're going through, and the tough the tough slog that it can be. It's like coming out of that. You do have some more stories, to tell. So, I've absolutely loved this conversation.
Likewise, man.
As I said, I think look, I knew that there was something going on under the hood when I looked at the brand, because you can kind of start to read a little bit into things. But it's been amazing to meet you two. I think you're doing amazing things, and I just love the detail that both of you provide in the two separate areas that you do provide it in. Look, as I said, I've absolutely loved the conversation.
Thank you.
A massive thank you to the both of you for coming on the show. Where can people find the product? Where do they find, both yourselves individually, but also the product and the brand as well?
Yeah, well, it's tomorrowskincare.com, and just Tomorrow Skincare on TikTok and Instagram. I'm Lewis Geisen. It's like the vacuum cleaner, but just with a G. And I'm on a bunch of socials. I'm really interested to talk to anyone building stuff or that wants feedback on what they're doing. I'm happy to help. And I also want to thank you, mate, because, I've listened to your podcast, and, you've got people that have shifted the needle with Australian brands, right? And I learn from that. So I'm always learning anyway. So the fact that you're building that community is an important piece for what Australia needs, and certainly what New Zealand needs. So congrats on everything you've done. And just excited to have, been a small part of what's, an amazing podcast with incredible guests on it. Humbled to be included within them.
Thank you very much, mate. Appreciate it.
Yeah, you can find me on LinkedIn, Raoul Lobo. Add me on there, shoot me a message. Would love to connect with anyone in Australia or across the world. Happy to chat about startups, skincare, TikTok, which I spend, we check the analytics on my phone. I spend 2 hours a day on TikTok, so I feel like I know a little bit about it now. But yeah, awesome to be on the show, and had a great time chatting.
Thanks heaps, fellas. Marto, thanks for putting this together. I appreciate you. And to our loyal listeners, we don't get to do this without you. Your support is just, I'm so thankful, and just so glad to be on the journey, meeting great people. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoyed the episode. We'll see you next week.
Awesome.